Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are going to be, we're diving deep into a story that honestly is both fascinating and kind of heartbreaking.
Yeah, it really is.
It's the story of Leo Gavoni, a Florida businessman who seemed to have it all. We're talking private jets, successful businesses, even strong political connections.
He really did seem to have it all, at least from the outside.
Right, exactly. But as we'll see, there was a dark side to his empire. We're talking about accusations of a massive scheme to steal millions of dollars
Millions with an M.
from special needs trusts, leaving these vulnerable families just absolutely devastated.
Just awful.
We've got court documents, investigative reports, and we'll even hear directly from some of the victims.
It's really powerful to hear their stories.
Yeah, definitely. So get ready to unpack this complicated case. By the end, you'll be asking yourself, how could this even happen?
It's a question a lot of people are asking.
Yeah, for sure.
Tonight, a family is outraged. Their disabled son is missing $500,000 that they entrusted to a St. Petersburg-based nonprofit, and they're turning to Aid on Your Side for answers.
In 14 days, that same nonprofit that was supposed to manage that missing money will be shut down for good. Investigative reporter Brittany Muller has been on this story since February. She joins us now in studio live.
Jen Keith, tonight, St. Petersburg Center for Special Needs Trust Administration is at the focus of a criminal investigation. But with more than $100 million still missing, new victims and their families continue to come forward, some of whom never even knew their money was missing. Now they're left to wonder when justice will be served and if they'll ever see any money recovered. Calvin Hopkins and his family had been in a vacuum, not realizing what was happening to his money.
Those funds were supposed to help make life easier for him, especially as he gets older, having different needs.
Lakeisha Pitts says when her son Calvin was 7, he was playing outside and a structure crushed him. He went without oxygen for at least 20 minutes.
He shouldn't have survived. He shouldn't have. But of course, through the grace of God and many, many prayers, God blessed him. He's my walking angel. He's a walking miracle.
Calvin underwent multiple surgeries. He was awarded a nearly $600,000 settlement to provide for his future care. That money was placed in a trust at St. Petersburg Center for Special Needs Trust Administration in 2021. He's now 14.
For me as a parent, I can never get back the child that he was before his accident took place.
Court records show between 2009 and 2020, Center founder Leo Gavoni loaned $100 million from more than 1,500 trusts at the center to his own company, Boston Finance Group. That loan was never repaid. In February of 2024, the center filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
He had around roughly $115,000 left in his trust.
That was in February. It's December, and you're just now learning of all of this?
Mind you, I find out this information after looking at your investigative report, and it made me go back and look at the timeline.
Pitts says she had never received any of the paperwork being mailed to notify her of the federal court battle, nor the FBI's criminal investigation. A center representative told her last month that $500,000 vanished from her son's trust.
They were supposed to protect them. This is a special needs trust administration, meaning these individuals are disabled, they are defenseless, and you are supposed to protect them. But instead of protecting them, you took advantage of them and you essentially stole their money, and money that was supposed to make life a little bit easier for them.
But now the case is moving forward as a federal judge shut down the center and has tasked CPT Institute to take over in 2 weeks and manage the remaining funds. But families like Calvin's who trusted the center are left in agony.
Pretty much says a lot about people who can be cruel enough to do this to people that need this much as I do.
Leo Gavoni has not been charged with a crime. We have not been able to reach him. His attorneys have previously told us no comment. But Calvin's family, like the hundreds of others across the country, still want to know, where did their money go?
And there are a lot of layers to this story, as you've been uncovering over months and months. Back in September, you told us about a local doctor who reached some sort of settlement in a lawsuit against Big Storm Brewery. That was significant because there were some claims that there was a connection between Big Storm Brewery and the center. But it left us all with a lot of questions. Have you been able to peel back any more of that onion?
Yes, right, Jen. We have learned that Leo Gavoni and his son, LJ Gavoni, co-owned Big Storm up until about a week ago. That lawsuit that you were just talking about alleged the two engaged in theft, embezzlement, and laundered millions of dollars from the center. But the parties involved reached a confidential settlement. In a post on LinkedIn just last week, LJ Gavoni wrote that it's time for him to embark on a new chapter and has since stepped down as president.
What's really striking about this whole case is how Gavoni was able to present himself as a champion for people with disabilities.
Right, like a real advocate.
While allegedly exploiting them for his own personal gain.
Yeah, the hypocrisy is just unbelievable.
It all starts back in the 1990s in Clearwater, Florida, where Gavoni worked as a financial advisor.
So he's advising people on how to manage their money.
Right.
But even in those early days, there were some red flags.
Yes, even back then. In 1991, the state's Department of Banking and Finance investigated Gavoni's handling of client funds.
Whoa.
They were looking into allegations of unauthorized transactions and even hidden complaints from his time at Smith Barney.
Smith Barney, that's a big name.
Yeah.
So these weren't small-time accusations.
Right. Those charges were eventually dropped.
Okay.
But it really makes you wonder if this was an early sign of what was to come.
Yeah, like a preview of the things he would be accused of later.
Exactly.
Okay, so maybe a close call, but it didn't slow him down. He goes on to found the Center for Special Needs Trust Administration in 2000.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar with special needs trusts, it's important to understand how they work.
Absolutely.
A special needs trust is designed to protect the assets of a person with disabilities. This is often money from settlements or inheritances.
Right.
And it's meant to protect that money without jeopardizing their eligibility for government benefit.
Exactly. It's a really important tool for families with loved ones who have disabilities.
And Gavoni Center becomes one of the biggest players in this field, managing trusts for families across the country. But, as we'll see, this is where things start to take a dark turn.
Right, and a key factor here is the lack of oversight in the special needs trust industry.
You know, you hear about regulations for banks and investment firms.
Yeah.
But when it comes to these trusts, there isn't the same level of scrutiny.
Not even close.
Really?
Stephen Dale, who heads the Alliance of Pooled Trusts, has even called it an unregulated industry.
Wow. Unregulated, that's a strong word.
So you have these vulnerable families entrusting their life savings to someone like Gavoni with very little oversight to protect them.
It's a scary thought.
It is.
So it sounds like a system that's just ripe for abuse.
Unfortunately, yes.
And Gavoni seems to have figured out how to exploit that system.
Exactly. Now, in 2009, Gavoni officially steps down as president of the center.
Okay.
But court records suggest he was still very much pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Oh, wow. So still in control.
He puts people he trusts in key positions, even his own daughter.
Really?
Yeah. And just a month after stepping down, the center approves a $2.5 million line of credit to Gavoni's company, Boston Finance Group.
So for those listening who maybe aren't familiar with the term line of credit, it's essentially like a credit card for businesses, right?
A good way to explain it.
They can borrow money as needed up to a certain limit.
Right.
But here's where it gets interesting. This line of credit from the center to Gavoni's company, it didn't stay at $2.5 million.
No, not at all.
It kept increasing.
It went from $2.5 million to $15 million, then $30 million, and by 2012, it had ballooned to a staggering $100 million.
Wait, $100 million? Where was all this money coming from?
Well, you probably guessed it. It was coming directly from those special needs trust funds.
The ones that the center was supposed to be protecting?
The very same.
And the families had no idea.
No idea. Their annual statements just listed the missing funds as generic investments.
That's unbelievable. So they're trusting this guy with their loved one's future, and he's allegedly raiding their accounts right under their noses.
It's a betrayal of trust on a massive scale.
It makes me wonder, what was he even doing with all this money?
Well, that's where things get even more outrageous. While Gavoni was allegedly siphoning millions from these vulnerable families, he was living the high life. We're talking multiple homes, a pool house, lavish vacations.
How lavish are we talking?
And even a private jet.
Okay, a private jet. Now that's next level.
It is.
But I guess it shouldn't be surprising. He was really building this image of himself as a financial guru. Always dressed impeccably, acting like he had all the answers.
He was playing the part to perfection.
But I'm guessing there were also stories about his less charming side.
Oh, definitely. Former employees describe him as having a really volatile temper.
Oh, wow.
There were even accounts of him threatening people, yelling at potential competitors.
So not just a bad boss, but maybe even a dangerous one.
It seems that way.
It's almost like a double life.
That's a good way to put it.
The charming philanthropist on the surface, and then this alleged ruthless schemer behind the scenes.
That's a classic case of appearances being deceiving.
And remember, all of this is happening while the families whose trust funds were being drained remain completely oblivious.
They had no idea.
So for years, they have no idea that their loved ones' futures are being jeopardized. I'm curious to hear more about the impact this had on these families. Do we have some specific examples?
Yes, we do. One of the families impacted by Gavoni's alleged scheme was the Schlossers. Their daughter, Sarah, was severely injured in a car accident.
Oh.
And she received a settlement to cover her lifelong care. That money was placed in a trust managed by the center.
So they did everything right. They put the money in a trust, thinking it would be safe and secure.
They did?
But when the center filed for bankruptcy in 2024, Teresa Schlosser, Sarah's mother, received a devastating letter, nearly $200,000 money that was supposed to ensure Sarah's care was simply gone.
It's hard to even fathom.
There was only $10,000 left in the trust.
It's unimaginable.
Oh my gosh, that's just heartbreaking.
It is.
I can't imagine the betrayal they must have felt.
It's a tragedy.
And the Schlossers weren't alone?
Sadly, huh?
There must be others.
We also have the story of Calvin Hopkins, a young man who was just 14 years old when an accident left him disabled.
Oh gosh.
He lost $500,000 from his trust fund, money that was supposed to help him live a full and independent life.
It's awful. These stories are truly devastating. It's hard to comprehend the impact this must have had on these families, not just financially, but emotionally.
You're absolutely right. And what's even more shocking is that even as the center was collapsing, Gavoni was allegedly running a similar scheme through another nonprofit he founded.
Another one. So this wasn't a one-time thing.
It seems not. This new organization was called the Directed Benefits Foundation.
Okay. So two nonprofits, both allegedly used to siphon money from vulnerable families.
That's what the evidence suggests.
This raises the question, just how deep did this alleged web of deceit go?
That's a question we'll try to answer as we continue our deep dive.
It's a lot to unpack. We'll definitely dive deeper into that in the next part of our deep dive. We'll look at the Directed Benefits Foundation, Gavoni's growing political connections, and how his empire eventually started to unravel.
It's a story you won't want to miss.
Stay with us.
So we saw how this whole scheme impacted families like the Schlossers and Calvin Hopkins.
Yeah, it was just devastating.
But it actually gets even more complicated.
Oh, no.
Because while the Center for Special Needs Trust Administration was heading toward bankruptcy, Gavoni was allegedly setting up a parallel scheme.
Another one.
Through another nonprofit he founded called the Directed Benefits Foundation.
It's almost like he's playing a shell game with these families' money.
That's a great way to put it. This new nonprofit, it attracted families with special needs trusts.
Just like the center.
Just like the center.
Oh, man.
But according to the State Attorney General's investigation, over $2 million vanished from this foundation as well.
Unbelievable. So even as one scheme was falling apart, he was allegedly setting up another one.
That's right. And this is where the story of Karen Fisher comes in.
Okay.
She was an assistant that Gavoni promoted to vice president of the Directed Benefits Foundation.
Okay.
Now, Fisher claims that in an affidavit that she was essentially used as a scapegoat.
A scapegoat?
Yeah, she says she was signing checks and documents at Gavoni's direction without really understanding what was happening.
It's almost like she was a pawn in his game.
That's exactly how it appears. Fisher even alleges that Gavoni was incredibly paranoid about being recorded, even by his own employees.
Really?
Yeah, she describes him placing his phone and his handgun on a filing cabinet during meetings.
Whoa, okay.
Just to make sure there were no secret recordings.
That's a little unnerving.
It is, right? It really paints a picture of someone who was aware of the potential consequences of his actions.
Yeah.
And was taking extreme measures to protect himself.
So now Fisher faces potential charges while Gavoni maintains his innocence.
Right.
It really highlights how complex this alleged scheme was.
It does.
And how those caught in the middle can become victims themselves.
That's exactly right. But the story doesn't end there because as Gavoni was allegedly building this empire of deceit, he was also setting his sights on the world of Florida politics.
Okay, so from finance to politics, that's quite a leap.
It is.
What sparked that move?
Well, it seems that his political donations, they skyrocketed right around the time the alleged scheme began.
Really?
We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. going to various Republican candidates and committees.
Okay.
Gavoni even served as finance co-chair for David Jolly's congressional campaign back in 2014.
So he was actively involved in fundraising and supporting political campaigns.
He was.
But was it just about donating money, or was there more to it?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yes.
Jolly's campaign, it wasn't the only one to benefit from Gavoni's largesse.
Okay.
Gavoni's company, Boston Finance Group, also paid Jolly $250,000.
Wait, $250,000?
Or consulting work.
That's a pretty substantial sum.
It is. It definitely raises questions about the nature of their relationship.
Yeah.
And whether Gavoni was seeking to influence policy or gain access to powerful figures.
Yeah, definitely raises some red flags.
It does. And speaking of access, Gavoni also became a director of Enterprise Florida.
Okay. And for our listeners, Enterprise Florida is?
A public-private partnership
Okay.
aimed at promoting economic development in the state.
So a pretty influential position.
It is, and it's important to note that Gavoni's involvement with Enterprise Florida was through investment
Okay.
and not direct appointment by the governor.
Right.
But it still speaks to the level of influence that he had cultivated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And while some politicians who received donations from Gavoni have since distanced themselves.
Right, like they've donated the funds to charity or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Others haven't.
So they kept the money.
That's right. Tampa City Council member Bill Carlson, for example, received over $24,000 in contributions
Wow.
from Gavoni-linked corporations for his re-election campaign in 2023.
It's a complex issue, you know?
It is.
On the one hand, you have these victims who lost their life savings.
Right.
And on the other, you have these politicians who may have benefited even unknowingly from these allegedly stolen funds.
It's a tough situation.
It makes you wonder about the potential ripple effects of this scheme.
It does.
And how far-reaching the consequences might really be.
Absolutely. And while all this was happening in the world of politics, Gavoni was also making waves in a totally different industry. Craft beer.
Craft beer, huh? Interesting.
Yeah, he bought a significant stake in Big Storm Brewery back in 2013.
Okay.
And the company just rapidly expanded,
Wow.
opening tap rooms all across Florida,
Really?
and even securing deals with sports franchises like the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Wow.
So from finance to politics to the world of craft beer, Gavoni seemed to have his fingers in a lot of pies.
He did, and the brewery's growth was nothing short of astonishing.
Right.
Especially in a competitive industry like craft beer.
That's true. But some industry insiders,
Okay.
like former state senator Jeff Brandes, who himself owns a stake in a brewery,
Okay.
they started to wonder where all this money was coming from.
I mean, yeah, it's not every day that a brewery just seems to have access to an unlimited supply of cash.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Brandes recalls how Big Storm seemed to have this almost magical ability to secure funding.
Like they had a secret money tree or something.
Yeah, something unusual for a relatively young company.
Right.
In such a tough industry. And remember, this was all happening at the same time.
Right.
That money was allegedly being siphoned from those special needs trust funds.
So the timing definitely raises some eyebrows.
It does.
Is there any evidence to suggest that those funds were directly used to fuel Big Storm's growth?
Well, there was actually a lawsuit
Oh, wow.
filed by one of the investors in Big Storm,
Really?
alleging just that.
So they thought the brewery's rapid expansion was fueled by these stolen funds.
That's right.
Wow, so these weren't just rumors. The allegations were being taken seriously enough to warrant legal action.
That's right.
So what happened? What was the outcome of that lawsuit?
Unfortunately, the lawsuit was settled confidentially, so we don't know all the details.
Oh, so we don't know for sure if Big Storm was built on stolen money.
We don't, and as the Center for Special Needs Trust Administration was heading towards bankruptcy, Big Storm also started to crumble.
Really?
Yeah, several tap rooms closed abruptly, with landlords claiming millions in unpaid rent.
It's almost like a house of cards collapsing.
A great analogy.
Gavoni builds this empire on a foundation of alleged deceit.
Right.
Enjoys a life of luxury political influence.
Yeah.
Only to see it all come crashing down.
That's right. But the real tragedy, of course, is the devastating impact this has had on the victims.
The families who trusted Gavoni with their life savings?
That's right. Money meant to care for their loved ones with disabilities.
Yeah, the sense of betrayal and loss they must feel is just unimaginable.
It's difficult to even comprehend. And as we head into the final part of our deep dive,
Right.
we need to understand the aftermath of Gavoni's alleged scheme.
Definitely.
What are the legal repercussions?
Yeah.
What happens to these victims? And most importantly, how do we prevent this from happening to other families?
Those are the big questions we need to answer. We've uncovered a lot in this deep dive into Leo Gavoni's world.
We really have.
From his alleged financial schemes to his political maneuvering, and even his venture into the craft beer business.
Uh-huh.
It's a story that has left us with, honestly, more questions than answers.
It really is a complex case.
But there's one question that I think weighs heavily on everyone's mind. What happens now?
Yeah, what now?
What are the consequences for Gavoni? What happens to the victims? And most importantly, how do we even prevent this from happening to other families?
Those are the big questions.
They are.
Let's start with Gavoni.
Okay.
As of right now, he hasn't actually been charged with any crimes.
Really?
But he's facing some serious legal battles.
Okay.
There are 2 class action lawsuits from the trust fund holders
Right.
and a complaint from the bankruptcy trustee.
So they're coming at him from multiple angles.
They are, and they're seeking a jaw-dropping $142 million in damages.
$142 million. That is just an unbelievable amount of money.
It really is, and that includes interest.
And what about this Florida Attorney General?
Right.
They were investigating the missing $2 million from the Directed Benefits Foundation, right?
Yes, that investigation is still ongoing. Their complaint cites numerous violations, including theft, deceptive trade practices, and breaches of nonprofit law.
So they're not messing around.
They're not. They've already frozen Gavoni's assets.
Okay.
And further legal action is definitely a possibility.
So while he hasn't been charged criminally yet, the legal pressure is definitely mounting.
Absolutely.
But, you know, in the middle of all this legal wrangling, it's easy to forget about the real victims.
Yeah.
The families who lost their life savings.
It's easy to get caught up in the legal details, but those are the people who are really suffering.
Exactly. And is there any hope for them to recover their funds?
That's the heartbreaking part.
Yeah.
The likelihood of a full recovery is very, very slim.
Oh, man.
The Center for Special Needs Trust Administration is bankrupt.
Right.
And even if Gavoni is found liable and ordered to pay, it's unclear if he has the resources to even cover the full amount.
Oh, wow. It's just a devastating situation for these families. They did everything right, placing their trust in someone they thought would protect their loved ones' futures, only to have that trust completely shattered.
It's a tragedy.
It's hard to imagine the emotional toll this has taken on them.
It's truly unimaginable.
This whole case is a wake-up call.
Absolutely.
We need greater transparency, accountability, and regulation to prevent this from happening again.
I completely agree. It's not enough to simply punish those who are responsible after the fact.
Right.
We need to create a system that prevents these schemes from even happening in the first place.
And how do we do that?
Well, it starts with awareness. Families need to understand the risks, ask questions, and be vigilant about who they entrust with their finances.
So it's about doing your research, really understanding who you're working with.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to seek independent legal advice. It can make all the difference.
It's also a reminder that we all have a role to play in speaking out against financial abuse.
That's right.
If you suspect something is wrong, don't hesitate to report it to the authorities.
Absolutely. Silence only benefits those who seek to exploit others.
This deep dive into the Leo Gavoni case has been eye-opening, to say the least.
It has been quite a journey.
It's a reminder that these financial scams can happen anywhere to anyone.
That's true.
And that even those who present themselves as champions for vulnerable communities can betray that trust.
Absolutely. But it also highlights the incredible strength and resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah.
Because despite the immense hardship these families are facing,
Right.
they continue to fight for justice and for the care of their loved ones.
Their determination is truly inspiring. And for anyone listening who might be in a similar situation, please remember that you are not alone.
That's right. There are resources available.
Yes, and there are people who want to help, so don't give up hope.
You are not alone.
This deep dive has been, well, it's been a lot,
It has.
but I think we've covered a lot of important ground.
We have, from the intricacies of special needs trusts
Right.
to this alleged web of deceit that was woven by Leo Gavoni.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
It has. But amidst the complex legal battles
Right.
and the heartbreaking stories of loss,
Definitely.
there's a clear message. We must remain vigilant,
Yes.
demand accountability,
Yes.
and work together to protect the most vulnerable members of our society.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been our pleasure.
We hope you found it informative and, more importantly, empowering.
I do.
Remember, knowledge is power, and by understanding the risks and asking the right questions, we can all help create a safer and more just world for everyone.
That's our goal.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.